The latest twist in the United States and Israel's war against Iran, now in day 81, as US President Donald Trump bows to diplomatic pressure from Gulf allies to potentially suspend or pause temporarily renewed military strikes against Iran. This is in the aim of trying to give diplomacy one last potentially vital chance. However, should this fail, what military options remain for President Trump? Now, the US principal allies in the region, including Kuwait, Qatar, UAE and Saudi Arabia, collectively put pressure on Donald Trump recently to pause any kind of military action going forwards, even just for a day or so, to try and give that diplomacy one last chance. Now, these countries represent significant policy influence with the US due to their increasing and large-scale troop deployment numbers. Kuwait hosts 13,000 US troops, Qatar 10,000, the UAE around 3,000, and Saudi Arabia about 2,500 troops. More broadly in the region, troop numbers from the US have swelled recently from pre-war numbers of 40,000 to now over 50,000 troops. This represents the significant number and more than many in recent years. Now, as the US President convenes meetings with his senior military advisors, what plans will come to place and what options will the US President have for military strikes against Iran? Now, really, there are two main schools of thought on this. There's a most likely and a most dangerous course of action. The most likely course of action would be a renewed aerial campaign by US forces, primarily F-35 and F-15 fighter jets, which would be used to target existing and remaining key defence and nuclear sites across Iran. Now, even though this would be a short-term campaign, maybe just 2 or 3 days, it will be sustained and hard enough to really try and force the Iranian regime back to the negotiation table, even just in the short term at least. Now, here this represents more of a worry within wider US planning policy circles, which is the current expenditure rates of both US ammunition and missile stocks against Iran. If we take, just for example, the US cruise Tomahawk missile system has been used extensively throughout the war. Now, whilst current numbers are classified, there's a pre-war number of around 4,000 stocks, and this has already been depleted by up to 800. Now, such a high sustainment of ammunition in the short term is expected, at least on the onset of a war. Long term, this isn't sustainable. So both current US stock numbers and future planning purchases from industry are enormous considerations for plans for the US President, whichever option he chooses going forwards. Now, the second option represents the most dangerous one, therefore the least likely, but it's still a consideration nonetheless, and that's sending a potential land incursion into Iranian territory itself. Now, most likely this would be conducted by the 82nd Airborne Division, which was retasked about 7 weeks ago from the Indo-Pacific to the Gulf. Originally, it was deceived that they were possibly going to seize the Karg Island oil terminal just off the Gulf. More likely now, they would likely seize and capture remaining crucial Iranian nuclear infrastructure sites, particularly at Isfahan. Now, around Isfahan is a layered and integrated air defence system, ring-fenced by around 700 miles of mountainous terrain. So it's very inaccessible and very dangerous once US forces would get there, placing land forces in increasing risk of any repercussion and strike by Iran. Whichever military option President Trump chooses, it will represent much more significant risk for US forces involved than even 81 days ago. And in the short term, at least, it's highly unlikely any deal with Iran will be reached going forwards, no matter how much US Gulf regional allies wish the US to continue stalling any military strike. However, the longer the US president decides to leave a military strike, the Iranian regime will increasingly view this as whether President Trump has the resolve or not for a hard military campaign.